So this evening I have two people from the different political divide to discuss with us this particular issue. In studio, Mr. Augustine Otuko is a private secretary to the president. He's in charge of political affairs. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Otuko.
Good evening, Comrade Anderson. Thank you for inviting me yet again to share ideas about our country. Thank you.
In studio, Mr. Alex Waiswa Mufumbira is the spokesperson of the National Unity Platform Party. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
I am very humbled. I'm the deputy spokesperson.
You're the deputy spokesperson. I have seen somewhere people actually referring to you as the spokesperson by virtue of Joel Senyonyi becoming the leader of opposition.
Well, his becoming leader of opposition does not create a vacuum in his office. It is only the foresight of the work that is ahead of us that can warrant. But as of now, I'm still serving in the capacity as deputy spokesperson and closely monitored by Joel Senyonyi.
Thank you very much for making time to be with us.
I am very humbled every time I have the opportunity to be here.
All right. Gentlemen, you all followed the address by President Yoweri Museveni, but also this issue of foreign interference in our affairs is not coming up for the first time. He has stated this matter. Almost every speech he makes, he sort of brings it out. He sort of suggests that Uganda is now so strong that it doesn't require any peers or any foreigners to look at to get involved in what is actually happening here. I'll begin with you, Mr. Tuko, probably to help us understand. When President Yoweri Museveni talks about foreign interference, what exactly is he alluding to?
Thank you very much, Anderson, once again. It is indeed true for a very long time, progressively, from 1986, the president has been consistent about the role the foreign powers must play. In most of his speeches and that I've read, you and also those that have listened, you deduce the fact that the president is simply saying we can work with foreigners, but as partners, not as those that are dictating on the affairs of our country. This does not come from Museveni as an individual. We must be able to appreciate the history that Africa has gone through. If we decided to begin from the time of slave trade, you realize that actually it was the foreigners, it may not necessarily be the Europeans, but it was the foreigners that were able to recruit Africans, the African chiefs, the gullible African chiefs and kings at that time to subdue their own people. So we became collaborators, compradors that were facilitating slave trade. And indeed, that disenfranchised Africa as a continent, and Uganda in particular. So you realize that the concerns of the president are not actually coming from nowhere. They have a history. And this history begins from the time of slave trade, where we had some Africans, Ugandans, East Africans participating in subduing, in disenfranchising the people that they were supposed to serve, and also that they were supposed to protect at that time. So as you keep growing, you realize that even during colonialism, when we were declared a protectorate in 1894, you realize that most of the things that we were doing, whether in terms of agriculture, in terms of trade, in terms of education, we were facilitating the interests of the Europeans that had colonized us at that time. So whether you were growing cotton, you were not growing cotton in order to process clothes in Uganda, for example. You had to grow cotton as a farmer, but in order to facilitate a factory in Europe. And that was growing Europe, while Africa remained the same. We remained impoverished, we remained poor. So post-colonial time, you realize that under post-colonial time, Obote comes in as our first president at that time. So the foreign interests come in. Much as Obote had helped us to attain independence in court.
Obote becomes our first prime minister.
He becomes our first leader, whether prime minister or president. You realize that most of the laws, most of the policies, most of whatever we are doing continue to facilitate the interests of the Western world. Why? When Obote leaves, the foreign influence in Uganda remained the same because we continued serving the interests of the Europeans. And indeed, when Obote tries to move the popular incident of the move to the left, he was basically saying, we are tired of foreign influence. We should now have a homegrown arrangement where we can be able to do these things ourselves. We must have these industries, we must have policies, we must have an education system that is clearly tailored to our interests. The foreign interests toppled him and brought in a new person that was supposed to serve their interests. But along the way, as Amin was serving the interests in the beginning, he was serving the interests of the foreigners. Unfortunately, along the way, I think he also realized that what the foreigners were doing was not in the interest of the people. He started disagreeing with them and said, no, we are not going to continue doing this. We must be able to have our own solutions as a people. So in other words, these statements of the president are not coming from nowhere. The president is simply re-echoing what the foreigners have been doing in this country over time. And indeed, as a president, even if I was one, I would say the same statements, because what we are interested in as a country, or what we should be, or we must be interested in, should be trade. We must trade as partners. We must all go to the same markets and compete. If you have interests in our oil, we must be able to have terms and conditions that favor both of us. You as a person coming in to do the trade, and as the beneficiaries as a country, we must be able to have this. This is what the president is basically saying.
So, in your view, how is this foreign interference actually being manifested? Because there are people who will also tell you that even during his time, we are almost making 4 decades with President Yoweri Museveni, he has also been doing the bidding of the West. Some people will tell you that.
You know, we must appreciate how the world politics is constructed. You cannot exist in isolation. Uganda as a country needs partners in terms of trade, in terms of military partnerships, and so many other things. So when you see the president having friends in the West, he's basically taking care of our interests as a country. But the point is, as we negotiate these interests, the West must not take advantage of us and dictate us to do what they want. It should actually be for our own interests. As they benefit, we must protect our interests as a country.
Can you explain how the West is actually dictating, as per your understanding of President Museveni's statement?
No,
what exactly are they doing?
There are a lot of examples I'll give you. In Africa, we also know the story of Kony. You know the story of Kony. It was basically plotted and believed that the foreigners were funding Kony. And we also have recently, I think a few years ago, the foreigners were trying to push in the GMO bill through Parliament. That was heavily funded. There was an accusation that MPs were being paid money to pass this bill, and indeed the president had to come in to prevail over this. We have also had situations where foreigners are believed to be arming different rebel groups that could be having like ADF. ADF without foreign support will not have the capacity to match the UPDF. So there are a lot of examples that we could talk about. And also when you look at, for example, the recent legislation in terms of homosexuality, we know very well as a country we have our own tradition, we have our own cultures, and many people, many grassroots people believe in the law that was passed by Parliament, the anti-homosexuality law. It's actually the most popular law in the religious sector of society, but it's also very popular in most of our cultural organizations. Why? Because as Africans, we have our own values, we have our own way of doing things.
All right.
And the Europeans and the West generally may also have their own culture. So it is important for us to appreciate the fact that much as the West supports homosexuality, they should be able to appreciate and say, we as a society do not agree with these values, and they should not impose them on us.
All right.
And I'll give you an example as I conclude. While the West has cut funding on Uganda, funding to Uganda in relation to the passing of anti-homosexuality law, the West is still funding Qatar. In 2023, Qatar received over $500 million in greening, but Qatar does not condone homosexuality.
All right.
So why should the West impose it on us and they are not imposing on Qatar?
All right. Let's go to Mr. Mufumbiro. What's your reading of this situation? President Yoweri Museveni insisting he does not want to see interference of foreigners in the affairs of Uganda.
It is extremely laughable, but a political rhetoric that the dictatorship has mastered at, finding escapism at ineptness, to where people could find solace to believe that he's right. Let us stop living a lie. Uganda is a signatory to over 50 treaties, international treaties. And these treaties is what brings us together in a number of issues, is what enables us to do trade, is what enables us to get funding for particular organizations and other things. I can tell you, our budget is in a debt of 90 trillion. But a debt of 90 trillion, about 60% of that debt is West debt, is a debt of the Western powers. And if somebody who has been in charge of a nation, arguably for the longest time in the history of that nation, is still protruding influence over his nation by a certain group of people, then that manifests his weakness at leadership. Because what you have not cured in the last 40 years, you can't cure it at 50 years. That is definitely where one would even open their eyes and see. But you cannot, the amounts, you cannot also, our leader has manifested at all forums that you must be committed at what you believe in. For example, our foreign policy as the National Unity Platform is to make sure that these players that have been enabling the dictatorship to maneuver over the citizenry stop funding that dictatorship. And no, the funding, what it brings to them, it facilitates oppression, it facilitates suppression, it suffocates the doctrine of separation of powers, the collapse of institutions, the total disregard and abuse of human rights by the funding of the Western powers. I can tell you, our budget is 52 trillion. Our always expected turnover of the Uganda Revenue Authority and input of our local revenue here is always a half or less than a half at 45% of whatever we are supposed to do. But the 55% to 60% is in terms of West grants, loans, and other types of funding. So if it is these fundings that come with strings attached that you have always been taking, these finances will come as telling you the respect of human rights. And the respect of human rights, the occurring disrespect, disregard the immoral attitude and character of the people in state power against the citizenry is even seen by the blind. It is enormous. The people, just where we are speaking from, a journalist was arrested, abducted from this radio station. I forget his name. What is his name? The gentleman who was arrested, I think, was working in Kabozi, but it is the same radio station. A journalist who was arrested because of his observations about the Speaker of Parliament. So these things are happening, and they have knocked on everybody's door. And once these things happen, definitely one has to feign in about foreign influence. But in the event that he wanted probably sometimes to make it political and run to the political escapism, I think he is also wrong, because the money we spend on foreign on inviting foreigners back here in terms of investment, the incentives that are given to foreigners here are over the incentives that are given to now the so-called alluded to wealth creators. You look at the tax holiday system of the local investor and the foreign investor. Where does it give more adage to a person to start business? To the local investor or to the foreign investor? A foreign investor will get free land, whereby a local investor will not have that free land. A local investor will get guarantee of government funds. For example, look at Lubowa. Look at many of the projects, the big projects that have been run in the country, where the foreign, so-called foreign investors in italics have benefited, one, from funding of government, or government being a guarantor to their projects. And we have lost in all those. Pioneer Bus, Agrico, one of the biggest scam. And let us go to the agreements that we have had, the business agreements that we have had with the foreign powers, the ones that you are now castigating, because it is you who has been in charge of this nation. And we challenge you to what has manifested under your dictatorship, and you have had absolute power. No leader in Uganda has had an environment, first of all, to be believed in by the population from the start, be supported wholesomely, forget the history, and move on to have a better country. You have lied to them. You changed their money for the benefit of the dollar. They accepted. You promised them modernization. Up to now, you see now we are feeding loam soil in halls of the city. That is not foreign influence. That is bad governance. The monies that we have borrowed, the monies we have ourselves failed to manage, has not been precipitated by foreign influence. It has been precipitated by your own personal and leadership weakness.
Right, Mr. Otuko, your colleague here seems to suggest that because of the association you have had with the foreigners, they have a right to comment on your issues, and he brings up the issues of governance from the side of human rights, and he talks about money that has been extended. Surely, if you are in a partnership with somebody, shouldn't that person have an opportunity to comment on how you're doing things?
Thank you very much. I think there has been a misconception about this word called human rights. What may be a human right in the Arab countries may not necessarily be a human right in Africa. And what may be a human right in African soil may actually not be necessarily a human right in the Western world. So the question of human rights is a variable that must be appreciated, and depending on the environment.
All right, maybe let's ask Mufumbiro to qualify the issue of human rights. What exactly?
First of all, human rights has a universal declaration, both statute but also persona. I mean, we also, as I said, that we have laws that we have assigned ourselves accustomed to, like the Universal Declaration of
they are
Human Rights,
global standards.
All
right.
Now, when they are discussing human rights, they discuss the global standards. For example, everybody is not supposed. Nobody is allowed to be tortured.
Okay.
For example,
all right.
In Uganda, people are tortured.
Now we get the example.
The right to life. In Uganda, people are murdered, and murdered by the state. Okay, so this abuse of those rights, I'm not talking about just rights, I'm talking about the universal human rights that are subsequent to the Rome Statute.
That's why I'm saying that human rights, irrespective of the so-called universality in quotes, are very subjective in every society. That is why societies across the world are still legislating on certain aspects of society or certain aspects of values. Why? Because they are values that are very unique to different societies. That's where you find when Uganda legislated against homosexuality, in quotes, the respect for minority rights is part of the universality in the statutes. But
no, it is not.
To our own unique situation, there are values that are pan-African that may not apply in the European nations. But to go back to what you asked, I want to say this, that I don't want us to misconstrue the president's message. The president is simply saying that there are those foreigners that want to over-interfere in the internal affairs of our country. And it's a fact. I'll give you an example. When the president was talking about the construction of a refinery, many foreign interests were against it, but he stood with it. He went to several countries, they refused to give us funding.
All right.
Why? Because they believed, they knew the impact the refinery would be able to cause.
I have to cut you short there. Let's go for a break. When we return, I'll ask you to expound more on those issues so that we need to understand how the foreign interference is actually being manifested. Because the president says he does not want to hear people making orders, directing Uganda on what they need to do. We want to get deeper into that particular area to understand whether actually there is that level of interference. Let's go for a break now. When we return, we'll continue to hear from the gentlemen here in studio. Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum, live on Radio 1 FM 90. Our topic of discussion today, we are looking at the concerns by President Yoweri Museveni over foreign interference in Ugandan affairs. I'm speaking to Mr. Waiswa Mufumbiro, who is the deputy spokesperson at the National Unity Platform Party, and Mr. Augustine Otuko, private secretary to President Yoweri Museveni, in charge of political affairs. Our discussion is focused on the statements made by President Yoweri Museveni yesterday, where he said Uganda is not ready to take orders from foreigners. So we are trying to understand what exactly is the concern of President Yoweri Museveni in that regard. Please share with us your views. Use the WhatsApp line, which is 0703 090 090. Tell us what you think, what we're discussing here in studio. And before we went for a break, Mr. Tuko, I wanted you to qualify the interference and at what level, because there are some people out there who actually think the moment comments start coming out on issues that would affect political power in Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni will speak out. Issues of human rights, issues of governance, etc. That's when he will come out. He does not want to hear anyone telling him what to do, especially when those issues come to the fore.
Thank you very much, Anderson. I think before we went for the break, I was simply trying to expound my earlier position that as a country, we are a sovereign state. We have things that are very peculiar for us as a country, and much as we deal with other foreign states, as I said before, that we cannot operate in isolation. That's how the world is constructed. So you must have friends because you must trade with them, for us to get the money. We also must be able to do a lot of things in terms of partnerships. We need loans when we don't have money. We must be able to have a friend that can be able to lend us this money.
So in that network,
yes.
in that network,
Yes.
Is it not possible that those partners should be able to comment on how you're doing things?
I think it's quite. You see, the Chinese have what they call a non-interference policy. You must deal with China, but avoid interfering with the internal affairs of China. Neither does China interfere with the affairs of different sovereign states. Basically, what China is communicating is that as you deal with us, make sure you don't pop your nose in our affairs, irrespective. Because once I come for a loan from you, it does not mean that I've picked it for free. These loans are going to be paid. These grants that are given to us are actually paid in other ways. If you checked carefully, you looked at these countries that give us grants, they come back in another way in terms of contracts, in terms of trade agreements, and so on. Much as they are giving, using one hand, they are giving you probably grants to do certain things. On the other hand, they are asking you give us trade. In other words, you are paying for these grants in another form. So, in brief, what I am saying is that foreigners should limit themselves to, if it is about trade, we must limit ourselves in terms of trade. If it is in terms of military partnerships, to what extent must you contribute to our military progress as a country? It does not mean when you are building our capacity in terms of military, you should be able to comment on us and give us direction. Why? Because we have laws and policies that are governing our society, and that is what drives us as a country, and that should be able to be our guiding tool, not the foreign interests.
Mr. Mufambiro.
Well, as I said, the universality of human rights is as its pronunciation, universal, and this is global. I can tell you, countries like China have also been called out severally on issues of Taiwan, on issues of Hong Kong. Just like you have not witnessed for the first time in the history of the world is calling out on Israel in the issues pertaining Gaza, whether Israel has a case or no case, the way they are reacting towards the human rights to the residents of Gaza Strip is supposed to be respected. So the archaic, backward philosophy of protectionism against human existence has ended. That era has been usurped by technology and advancement in whatever we do. Many of these loans, I can tell my brother here that, for example, the loans we get from Danida, the Danida loans that pertain the administration of court and whatever, to help in the doctrine of independence of the institutions in checks and balances, that is the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. I can tell you that these monies are only qualified by the signatures that we have appended to many of the statutes that govern us globally. I have given you the Rome Statute.
In other words, the loans we get come with conditions that we should respect.
And we are aware of these conditions. That is why, in absence of fulfillment of those conditions, we don't get them. And I can tell you, I have had them. He is from the office of the president. I can tell you, their office sent a person in their office, a son-in-law to the president, to the United States, to disqualify themselves from passing of the law because of AGOA. So the priorities, the factuality of the captors of the state in Uganda is to the benefit that they will give you a storyline that permits them for you to take that line.
Right.
I don't believe that they have been influenced. Now, where have they been influenced?
Mr. Mufambiro,
They don't allow them to torture people, they torture people.
In your political activities, Are you seeking foreign support to actually cause political change in Uganda?
Every political organization must have a foreign policy. Our foreign policy is clear, to make sure that we cut ties to the enablers of the dictatorship in Uganda, and that we are doing day and night. We have been successful, but we are yet to be more successful.
Have you been successful?
Well, there are circumstances where a lot of support of this regime. You know that this regime was in this election was not congratulated by many countries. You know that this regime, it is a fact that much of the funds were cut as a result of abuse of human rights. You know that many of the members of this oligarch have been sanctioned with the international
travel
laws that govern this country because of abuse of human rights, and these are members of the military. So we have been the reason probably you are seeing me still alive is because there is some force majeure that we have been able to engage to assist us in ensuring.
So it's actually true, like the president says, that you are working with foreigners.
No. We are not working with foreigners. We are asking foreigners. No, the liberation of our nation is all entirely into the hands of the citizens. However, the existence of this dictatorship has been enabled by their lies, by their coexistence with people that they are not morally upright to sit with on the same table, and we have manifested that. We have publicly stated that we want the enablers of this regime. Let me tell you, the United States of America every year has been giving General Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, in terms of finances and equipment and training, $1 billion
has been giving Uganda. Why do you tie it to President Yoweri Museveni?
No, but you know that
at the end of the day, the money comes.
You know that General Museveni himself has severally in Kololo said that he is the chief budgeter. So I am talking about the chief budgeter.
All right, Mr. Tuko.
Maybe just to, it's quite interesting that my brother here, Alex, has confessed that he is one of the compradors that are actually working for foreign interests.
No.
Not working for. He actually says
no. English. Excuse me.
I'll tell you.
Let's hear.
By the time
his understanding of
boast,
the
yes, by the time you boast about the foreign interference in most of the affairs of the country.
Like which one? You have failed.
Means,
as a person working with the president, you have failed to give us an example of where you have been influenced.
When you were submitting, I was actually allowing you to. So I think let's be civilized enough.
This is an interdiction.
Yes, let's be civilized enough. The point here is, getting back to what he was stating, once you cut the health support, it therefore means that most of the hospitals in this country will be affected. Irrespective of which political party you serve, we shall all be affected. That's what it means. So no Ugandan actually, in his rightful mind, should be able to boast and say, we are very happy with what the foreigners are doing to our country. On the issue of the law that he was talking about, I want to say this. The point I was making much earlier is that there is a lot of unfairness in most of these Western countries. Why? I have said in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, and most of those Arab countries, you cannot even attempt to talk about homosexuality. But they have partnerships where they have continued funding these countries, including the UN organizations. UN support has continued going to those countries. So the point I'm making is that why must Uganda suffer for protecting its values while the same values that are existing in other countries are being protected, and the same Western countries continue dealing with the respective countries like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia, and so on. What is so peculiar about Uganda on issues of homosexuality? Because other countries have laws that have existed for much longer time than Uganda. Why must it be Uganda Why must the West now be against Uganda?
Mr. Mufubiro, he seems to suggest that there's double standards when it comes to the West making directives to Uganda compared it with other countries.
And I have been speaking English, and very plain English. I said that our foreign policy is to cut the enabling ties of the dictatorship prevailing here. And that is as clear as it sounds. It does not need qualification of interpretation. So, comrade here is right to his own opinion. However, let me tell you, like he said, health. If you remember very well that the people who are found culpable for corruption and stealing monies of the sick people of HIV, Gavi funds and Global Fund was Alice Kaboyo, a nurse to General Yoweri Museveni, was Jim Muhwezi, and today they are in government. People who are found culpable, people who are found with liability, people who are censored, they are in this very regime. And then you are talking about the suspension of health funds.
In most of the cases you have quoted, these people were actually cleared.
No, I have
some even by competent investigations.
What are you talking about competent? We all know the types of investigations. These cases, it was an intervention of General Kaguta Museveni through the judiciary to end these cases. You know how the case of Mukula ended. It ended with the intervention of General Museveni, the head of the executive, getting 100 million shillings and passing it over allegedly to the legal framework of the other side. And how these people were taken off the files, you know. You also know that Alice Kaboyo took a plea bargain in court and returned the money of 20 million shillings that had been alluded to the fact that she had misappropriated. She accepted, and I'm just telling you that before you think of blaming us, the members of the National Unity Platform who have been here for less than 5 years, remember that your own actions have been precipitants to the cutting of this aid. We are only saying that the dictatorship here should not be enabled. For example, I was telling you that the US, in military contribution, it has been giving us over $1 billion US. And what is this doing? It is miming people. It is torturing people. It is prosecuting civilians in the general court martial. Yet even when somebody talks about the human rights, the basic human rights we are talking about are those that are enshrined in our own constitution.
All right, very quickly, let's hear from the listeners' comments that have come in. And there's a gentleman called David Toddy who is listening in from Gulu. He says, I appreciate what the president alludes to regarding meddling by foreigners. The challenge is in the sanity and tidiness of our politics in our motherland. And my brother Augustine can do something to that effect. He seems to suggest that there's a problem within our governance and politics. Marido Okelo, listening in from Kisumu, he says, Uganda under President Museveni is a signatory to several UN treaties, and there is no way he can stop foreign interference. His utterances are normal. Well, he uses some words there that I cannot read on air. He says, with corruption, he is the bedrock of this vice, and he has benefited a lot, no doubt. He should stop lamenting and start acting now, otherwise the scavengers are at large and he knows them. Then we have another comment. The Western influence continue to override Uganda simply because of the outdated policies and laws. He also says there are laws in place to sell human beings in labor markets abroad. Ugandan system must emphasize on political and social and economic independence if we are to reduce Western influence. That is Agre Musinguzi, listening again from Lubanda West. Somebody writes in and says, I like Noop, but their issues are not put straight. He has failed to conceptualize the issues. And then somebody else writes in and says, use the analogy of a family. Would Mr. Waiswa allow interference in his marriage because people contributed to the marriage? Appreciate sovereignty and global relations like is the case for social capital networks in our marriage. Then Peter in Mubende, there is nothing attached to external interference. ADF with Uganda's opposition in destabilizing the security of the nation. Each group is only trying to accomplish their own political aspiration. It's just the mind game of the president in defending himself and his cabinet. Jimmy in Kanyanya, there is no way beating about the bush. He who pays the piper calls the tunes. If he doesn't want them to interfere, let him throw their funds away, period. Then somebody says, can Mufumbiro tell us whether the United States founder and midwife of no party activities can he explain their actions in Guantanamo Bay, USF houses in Europe, bombing of Libya, the recent Afghanistan debacle, and Hiroshima, Nagasaki, whether they conform to international conversations and observance of human rights? That's another comment there. Why is the United States not a signatory to the Rome Statute, Mr. Mfumbiro? Somebody also wants to hear from you on that particular issue. Jeff from Nakawa writes a lengthy one. He says, good evening, listeners. It's mind-blowing to see that there are still some beings that are still pander to West as a sign of severe mental slavery. History shows that the Africans were meant to be programmed, taught, read, cram, retain, and parrot, but never to reason. So he's saying that if a sovereign state decides which policies to follow for its people well-being, not for the former master needs and the wants. That's his comment there. We have a number of comments still coming in. Isaac writes in and says, why is it that Mr. is concentrating on homosexuality? There's a lot of in the basket besides homosexuality. A lot of money is given to Ugandan government, roads, health, education, etc. For example, look at the street kids. Their rights are abused because of some of the elements benefiting from them being on the street. Then we have another comment from Anthony. Good evening, Spectrum. Let's try to remove sentiment and face reality and be wise in reasoning. When we debate, the president was right when he mentioned foreigners. I feel so glad when I see Uganda growing so fast in every sector. I give bravo to our president and urge other African presidents to emulate him in order for Africa to move forward. Those are some of the comments that are coming in, and I'll come to you, Mr. Mfumbiro, because there are some direct comments coming to you. Some people...
First of all, I don't know where I have said that I support America, not Uganda. I hold a visa of America, but I am not in America. I'm in Uganda. It is where I am domiciled and I have a home. So I have not at any way assumed the responsibility of being the spokesperson of America. However, I have told you the involvement of this government with the foreign powers, and I am wondering, for us, they are blaming us. The reason he is blaming us is telling foreigners to stop funding the dictatorship here. Now, even by reason, simple logic, when we succeed or not succeed, we are stopping foreign influence. Are you getting my point? Whether we succeed or not succeed, by asking them not to fund money here, to the dictatorship, it means we are ending foreign influence. And then the people who are saying, please leave them, give us the money, are the ones saying that again they do not want foreign influence. So it does not sound logical in that sense, because we are stopping foreign influence from oppressing the people of Uganda through military training, through funding. Because if you are going to fly like a bird, then you must know that you must have wings. And once you have those wings, you must know how to use them. Even America itself has been called out on the issue of human rights. You all know I have given an example of Israel and the Palestinians just in my concluded statements. Even the US, where they have abused human rights, they are not in isolation to being called out. Our point is that the foreign intervention, and I have explained in all this debate that the benefactor of foreign intervention has been Genome 7. Uganda is being mortgaged nearly half to Chinese. You mean Chinese are not foreigners? Somebody was discussing the ADF. The ADF Genome 7 has manifested that these were being funded by Mobutu. He's not from the West. They were being funded by Kabila. They were being funded by Bashir before the total breakout of Southern Sudan. These are not our words. And that is not where we have discussed. But we are discussing.
In the grand scheme of things,
we are discussing.
Those leaders you're quoting might be influenced by other countries to actually push for regime change here.
And for us, we have said, and I want to state it again here as the deputy spokesperson of the National Unity Platform, we believe, we know, we feel it within our strains and blood flow that the liberation of the second liberation of Uganda is going to be done by the citizens of Uganda by the Waiswas, by the Rukwagos, by the Onens, by Ugandans, not by anybody. However, it is important to understand that in the global governance of the world, there are statutes, there are foreign acceptabilities. That is why in every policy of a wanting government or a government in power, they must have a foreign policy.
All right.
And
very quickly,
that is where we are coming from as
very
the
quickly,
national
Mr. Otuko, as we come to the end of this show. Your response
maybe
to some of these
to
issues.
put this into perspective.
Very quickly.
The president was also very clear. Bashir and Mobutu are actually foreigners who had the interest to interfere with the affairs of Uganda. So when we talk about foreigners, we are only not looking at the West. We are looking at anybody outside the borders of Uganda. You become foreign, because if you were supported by Mobutu, you're supported by Bashir. Whose interests were they serving? They were basically serving the interests of the foreigners. To come back to the concerns of those that the messages, I may not be able to respond to
very quickly.
I also want to say this. Being a signatory to the international treaties does not give a green card for any international member or any country to have a direct ticket to influence the affairs of our country. I want to say this. These treaties are simply partnerships. These are international partnerships in terms of trade, in terms of human rights, and other aspects that we agree with them.
All right.
These are basically partnerships that we must be able to appreciate, so that as a country we say we are partnering with you in areas A, B, C, D, but on condition that you don't interfere with our affairs. That's basically what I'm saying.
All right. I'm afraid time is not our best ally.
But there are laws even in Uganda that still spell out the human rights we are discussing here, the right to live, and these are constitutional.
Yes.
These are
with that, we come to the end of Spectrum today. Thank you very much, dear comrades, for actually making time to be with us in your studio. There's always another time. We will continue this discussion some other time. We also thank the listeners for being with us and sharing their views as we continued discussing. Your views helped us to shape the discussion here in studio. Up next, we have the news in English with Miss Josephine Dagano. Thereafter, we'll have the Soul Train with BB Jr.